I've come to understand the prophets as mystics. I mean, the prophets have this sense of being so filled with divine presence that they can't help but speak. And not only speak, but the Hebrew prophets often embodied what they did. I mean, they would actually put themselves right in front of the people or the king or the ruler of an opposing army and say, here I am. He has sent me, and I have something to say. And they would do antics, dressing up. Jeremiah put a yoke around his shoulders to demonstrate the yoke that has been put upon the people of Israel by the Babylonians. He said, I'm not taking it off until my people are free. I mean, they were the original media hounds. They were not afraid to do something to get attention, but they did it out of a sincere love of God. What was one of the lines here? One of the professors said, God is here. That's the message. God is here. And if there's oppression, there's injustice, God is there too. And for me not to speak, not to act, makes me complicit. My complacency makes me complicit. So this is not a wild reading of the prophets. It's now a kind of a mainstream reading of the prophets. Maybe not in Christian evangelical seminaries where it's still about when is Jesus coming back and all this purely spiritual reading. But in Jewish seminaries and Roman Catholic seminaries and mainline Protestant seminaries, to read the prophets is to get a taste of this is what God does, selecting some people who have vision of how the world is supposed to be, and then calling people to get their lives in order according to that vision, even if it's at great cost. But it all starts with an experience of the holy. It's not politics first, it's God first, leading one to engage the public order for its healing. So Heschel read the prophets, he wrote about the prophets, he came from a long line of Hasidic rabbis. He was just being who he was when he came to America. And he found a society more interested in toasters. and you know, the Jewish seminary in Cincinnati, that is, as far as I know, the premier seminary for the training of Reformed rabbis in the United States
At the time. Is it still?
As far as I know, that's where you go. But that's as far as I know.
But you said reform.
The
What
Reform
about the
movement,
conservative?
conservative movement is a different movement.
Where do
Or
they study?
another place, I don't know. But part of the story next week is Heschel. And how does a Hasidic rabbi end up at a Reformed seminary? That's a fish out of water, it would seem to me.
The visa to the US.
Yeah. It could have
His
been.
life.
It could have been, right? Yeah, that was who was inviting him, so. But he goes to the conservative seminary in New York. That's where he spends most of his time. Anyway, I want to open up to your comments, your questions, your thoughts, your puzzlements, your inspiration.
I have another question about something that I didn't know or realize. So in Germany, around the time with the rise of Nazism, there had been a movement to disavow the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's correct.
And where was that coming from? Was that through any institutional church?
It certainly was. The Deutsche Kirche, the German church. It was the official Protestant church of Germany.
Wow.
So the documentary lays the blame at the feet of the Roman Catholic Church. That's only part of the story. The Protestant church was just as complicit with Hitler and eager to go after him to save their own skin. I don't know how else to put it. there was a small Bekannterkirche confessing church. And of course, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Niemöller, and some others were part of the Bekannterkirche. But most of them just went head over heels for Hitler to save themselves. And part of that was to de-Judify Christianity and even Jesus, which is a far reach academically.
Could I make a comment?
Please, Lucy.
I have experience with people I met at the Lutheran World Federation in '52, where I was a youth delegate. And I met people from the Confession Church. And I met a pastor who was one of the leaders in the camp we had at Suderfeld before the Lutheran World Federation. There were 40 Americans and 40 Germans. And we met in a camp where the Germans were a little restive because it had been a Hitler youth camp up there in the Bavarian. And oh boy, what an encounter. And there were always translators with us. So we had conversations earnestly for that 18 days before the Lutheran World Federation in Hanover, Germany, which was half bombed out. And we lived in half bombed out buildings with that experience. The confessional church pastors were also part of some of these discussions. And I remember one wry comment of one of the pastors with whom we were discussing. He said as a sort of aside, oh yeah, they have a nice jail there. For these parishes where the pastor stuck only to scripture, no interpretation, but they chose scripture that aimed toward the strengthening of your faith as Christians and the resilience you needed to have to hang in there. And he said there was always a Nazi, there was always a policeman at the back door. And if the policeman got a little restive, as you walked out, you were escorted to the local jail. And they couldn't keep you there more than one day. They were so letter of the law because you had said nothing that wasn't in the book, but you got your time in jail. And he got pretty well used to going to jail for a night. So it was there. It wasn't just a little bit. There was a lot of this going on. And I think that needs to be noted.
That's such an important memory because 1952 was only 7 years after the end of the war.
That's right.
Very fresh.
Well, I went over on the maiden voyage of the SSUX. You can imagine how fresh it was. It was the first year there were tourists.
Thank you. It's very important.
Comment. Send us more students, not those rich women who are, what do you mean you don't have hamburgers?
Paul, please.
Any idea what Heschel thought of Jesus?
I don't know. That's a
To
great
me,
question.
Jesus was a prophet in the true sense of the word that he, Heschel, was saying, living the faith, and you have to do more than just study. And Jesus knew the Jewish gospel, or the Jewish text, but he also went out there and lived and protested. And seems to me very similar to what Heschel did.
Yeah, well, that's one important way of looking at Jesus. Jesus was a spirit-drenched prophet who got into trouble for speaking and acting on behalf of suffering people. So I am using my little hand computer here to say, what did Heschel think about Jesus?
In that line, I part, you just asked Siri. And I part of the group, live Jewish group. When I'm on the computer.
Oh, say that again, sorry.
ICAR. I just Googled.
Oh, the ICAR.
Yeah.
The
ICAR is a leading edge Jewish community in Los Angeles that seeks to inspire people across the religious spectrum and is reverberating across the
that was mentioned.
Yes,
I
Thank you. Need some-
having trouble with the question.
good. I got no immediate hits on your question, but we'll keep that in mind. I wonder if Jesus is mentioned in the index,
Oh, prophets.
right? Meanwhile, someone else had their hand up.
Hi.
Yes, Nancy?
Well, I was thinking, sort of a big ball of wax here. When you think of evolution from a biological point of view, birds to bugs, and what about the idea that the prophets are universally, regardless of religion, looking for goodness, a better world? I think that's fair. And so it suddenly occurred to me that that is also evolution. So we have evolution biologically, and then we have evolution of this big spiritual idea.
Beautiful,
Mhm.
beautiful.
You know, my second semester with my senior writers, we do op-ed pieces, and in conjunction with some of the reading that we do, one of the questions I ask them is they write an op-ed on who the modern day truth tellers are. And if there's such interesting reads, to your point, because we get a sense of some of that evolution of what it means to be a modern day activist for the world. Yeah.
Thank you.
May I ask what school, where you're teaching the content?
Sorry.
What school?
Where are you
At
teaching?
New Trier.
Also.
And
What a new trip.
a question, somebody later in the first half of the documentary mentioned the history of mid-century Judaism in the United States, saying, he was kind of shocked, not just by the materialism of post-war America, but the Jewish church here wasn't into talking about the prophets. It wasn't into this. They didn't stand for this or that. What did they stand for? Were they just too bland, worried about anti-Semitism as it stood in the United States, which I guess in some ways inspired the Nazis?
Yeah, I think we need a rabbi or a scholar to really address that. That's a really good question. My general impression of Reform Judaism is that there was, and that Reform Judaism goes back to the 19th century, predates both world wars. My general impression is there was an effort to really blend in. Funny story, I find it funny. When Vince and I were here before, 23 years ago, we became friendly with the associate rabbi at Temple Jeremiah and his partner. They found each other. They wanted to make sure that they married a fellow Jew. That was very important to them because they did adopt children together and they wanted to have a Jewish household. This is how Jews exist from generation to generation, they believed, is by committing to one another in the Jewish household. And Rabbi Victor, you may happen to remember Victor Appel. Victor and his partner both believed in following kosher. And I remember so well, Victor said, the problem with us at Temple Jeremiah is not that we are a gay couple, it's that we're kosher.
Oh my.
And they had to make all these arrangements in the kitchen at Temple Jeremiah to accommodate this funny rabbi who seems to want to eat kosher. Which, to your point, tells me, as an observer, that there was this sense of bending to the point of obliterating Jewish identity in some parts. But that's kind of a harsh statement. As a Gentile, I feel uncomfortable saying it. So let's ask Rabbi Elder when we get a chance to talk to him about that. When you were all growing up, assuming in Christian context of some kind, did you have friendly relationships with rabbis and synagogues in your communities?
Never knew about them.
Yeah.
Not enough.
Sarganash was so totally quite semi-wealthy.
Yeah. So
Of course, we were south of Rogers Avenue, so we learned about restrictions early on because mother was not welcome at the Saguenay Women's Club because we lived a block and a half south of Rogers Avenue. Then the president, Mrs. Amos, whose son was, I think, in my class, a year or two after we moved to Saguenay, they built a home on Brynmore, which was a half a block south of us and faced Leba Woods. And suddenly the restrictions were removed because the president of the women's club had moved south of Rogers Avenue. So did my Aunt Myrtle at Kilbourne, 2 blocks west of Costner, where suddenly post-war things built up. Before that, it was totally prairie and we wandered around in the woods. Aunt Myrtle joined. Mother said pox on both their houses. I'm not going to bother, and never joined. So I know about restrictions.
So, I bring up this question, did anyone else have, in the churches you grew up in, fraternal relationships with Jewish congregations?
I did, I grew up in the Wilmette Congregational Church.
Yeah.
So, I can't remember if we shared space with them, but there was, a dialogue that we held with others.
At some point, Sukkot Shalom met in First Congregational Church of Wilmette. I'm posing a theory here, a hypothesis that I think prior to mid-century, the last mid-century, not the one we're getting close to now, that there was not a lot of mixing and mingling of Christians and Jews. That this really emerged mid-century. That's my hypothesis. Like the church I grew up in, United Methodist Church, we did have a relationship with an African-American congregation in our neighborhood, but not the synagogue, and I don't know why. But the point being that I think the civil rights movement and the war in Vietnam had a way of bringing together Jews and Christians in a more public way, perhaps, than had ever been before. That's hypothesis number 2. Out of Jewish and Christian cooperation, the civil rights movement, war in Vietnam, came some organizations, the National Conference of Christians and Jews. And I think at the local level, a lot of ministers, priests, and rabbis got together to lead their congregations in efforts to respond to the civil rights movement and the war. And it was kind of a new thing, and to see Heschel and King marching together, to us, that's not a big deal. I think to America in 1960 something, just that was probably pretty remarkable.
It was a symbolic image.
Yeah,
Thanks for putting that into context with the time.
I'm thinking that's true. Now, there had to be some Jewish Christian partnerships
I
before that.
grew up in a Unitarian church where I came away thinking there wasn't much difference between the two.
Wow.
Mhm.
And I went to a small grade school, which was a third Jewish. All my friends seemed to be Jewish. So I would go to the temple on Friday night, but the temple was all the men wore hats. And I thought, how strange, they just want to be separate. I always thought that the adults stayed in a Jewish group. And I still think that happens. The Jewish men don't intermarry the blacks and the women. So, I mean, it's a human thing too.
Any other comments you want to offer about our, what we've got today? We've got 3 more minutes.
Well, something that spoke to me was when his daughter, I think, was speaking and talking about Herschel's understanding of God and when bad things happen.
Yeah.
Especially the Holocaust, saying, well, where was God? And his response would be, where were you?
Yeah.
That's a
That
great.
really spoke to
I
me.
know that. Me too. Yeah.
But his idea that if you see evil, then it comes from you, is hard to grasp. Isn't that what he said?
Isn't
Say
it
it again.
No, I don't think so.
It's recognition that he was talking about.
If you see, yeah, you recognize, you have, I
You
don't know, it
recognize
comes-
what you
he
did.
said it comes from you.
Well, I think, at the beginning, that reminds me, he said something at the beginning of the documentary. we're not all to blame, but we are all responsible. So it's a level of not guilt, but if you could have done something, why didn't you?
Activism.
But it's in, with the evils within you, and so is the good within you, when you see the good.
Yes.
And yeah, and I think that's exactly what he's saying. When there's evil in the world,
Yeah.
we can't just say it's there.
Yeah.
We need to look at our own complicity. Likewise, when we see good in the world, it speaks to the good in me. I think that's
Yeah.
what he's saying.
So it's
Learn-
not,
That's what I'm.
That's what he's saying. Okay, yeah,
oh, it speaks to you, not that it's in you.
yeah, no, it resonates within you. It resonates with you because it's also within you. And I think that's a mystical perspective. It's that I'm never separate from anything. In fact, I'm connected to all that.
Thank
is.
you, yes.
And mysticism is always about a sense of belonging, participation. Like, there is no such thing as individualism.
Perfect.
There's a self, but there's the self that's always related to all things, including ultimate divine reality. And it's found in every world religion.